Today, I bring you some stories of women peacemakers from around the world who are trying to create this new world of peace, starting in their own lands. They need our help. They need your wisdom as a global community committed to strengthening a culture of peace resources. Some of what I share today exposes the world which must change. I apologize in advance if some of what we discuss is discomforting. But this is the world of women peacemakers. It is also the world where the spirit of hope and recovery and change can reach our hearts. I invite you to listen to the wind carrying their wisdom and see the horizon that includes their vision of peace as well as their hurt. Sharing the words and stories of women confronting globally rampant abuse and gender-based violence and working to change the direction of conflict-ridden societies has been part of my personal journey to support those who are laboring to end the cycles of violence in their lives, in their homes, in their lands, and on our shared planet. This last 6 years has been especially rewarding for me. I had the privilege of helping to create a very special program because of a gift of the late, quiet philanthropist for peace, Joan Kroc at the University of San Diego. Mrs. Kroc, from humble beginnings in upper Midwest of the United States, did not suffer personally from the violence that inspires many of us and many of those we'll be talking about today. But the widow of the McDonald's hamburger chain founder looked out on a world struggling, where she saw conflict and tension and unnecessary violence, and she began her quiet career as a philanthropist for peace and justice, at home and abroad. Peace personal, peace cultural. She envisioned a place where people could come to explore and expose paths to a more peaceful world. After working discreetly behind the scenes with her funds to open opportunities for better relationships for the US and the Soviets, the Contras and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and elsewhere she could quietly support citizen diplomats, she gave funds to create the Institute for Peace and Justice, and more recently, a School of Peace Studies, maybe the first in the United States. Our IPJ mission is to foster peace, cultivate justice, and create a safer world. Ask her why she gave the money to do such things, and she would say, we must make peace and not just talk peace. We try to live up to her dream to be a space where people from the grassroots and the policy leadership may sincerely seek understanding and reconciliation, to be a place where they can dialogue and talk with one another. During its first 8 years, IPJ has had the privilege to work with diverse people in many settings. We've been on the ground in Uganda and Nepal for conflict resolution work. We've focused on connecting high school kids on both sides of our border with Mexico and the US. We've had a chance also, and this is the most exciting part, to really document women peacemaker stories from around the world, because they're not sufficiently heard. We don't know how to transform conflict unless we listen to them. It's important to introduce those isolated by geography or mindsets to a greater understanding of what's happening in this world, as well as give access and experience to those in communities needing alternative visions from biased and manipulative media and ignorance. Our desire has been to open minds beyond the labels and bring into focus the meaning of words like the Palestinian Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, who came to remind us that we need to redefine security as human, comprehensive, multifaceted, transnational, and cultural, beyond any sovereignty. That's the way we'll build a new and sustainable peace. The Women PeaceMakers Program has allowed us to document the lives of women who are leaders in social justice, activism, and resistance to violence. As a psychological anthropologist and a journalist, I want to magnify how women are transforming violent conflicts in spirit and in community. From the former High Commissioner of Human Rights and President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, to the young ex-Maoist combatants that I've been working with in Nepal, I've seen the exact same powerful drive. Not just to question why violence, abuse, exclusion holds sway, but to change such realities into a nonviolent and more inclusive world. It's essential we see them, believe them, join them. Their success is our survival. We know that violence and war are easy. Look at the world today. We know that peace and justice are difficult. Come with me on any mission I go on. And we know that women can really do the hard stuff. In a remote village with the Guambiano Indians as a young Peace Corps volunteer 45 years ago, I watched women bear the children and bury them, work in the fields and cook the food, quell arguments and soothe the injured. They taught me about peace, acceptance, and being a more humble person. They were the guardians of life and peace 10,000 feet up in the Andes. Now, these many years later, unfortunately, policies and conflicts they had no part in creating and no way of getting a voice and stopping are taking away some of the hope and killing their children through guns and drugs and warmongers that they didn't have to face in the past. But like other women around the world, they must have their voices heard. In Uganda, walking through fields of skulls and open graves at the end of a 20-year civil war, I found women facing wild pigs to gather coffee, rebuilding coffee factories on their own, tending to their raped selves and sometimes the babies of those rapes, and certainly violated little girls. They were taking in the children of parents who'd been slain. They were planting small gardens by the side of the road while they slowly began taking back the land from the bush that had grown up during the violence. And this land that was so laden as you walk through with broken families and the bones still scattered in the countryside. Those women had to stay during the wars. They had babies who cried. They couldn't run away in those times. They had to care for them. Their men had scattered either to join rebel forces of one stripe or another, or they died. So putting life back together was their task, as it has been women's work throughout the ages after wars and violence that the women did not start. A woman's experience of suffering, the brunt of increasing impoverishment of her people, of knowing intimately the fragmenting of her community, of being targeted for sexual violence, gives her a right to have a voice in confronting the seemingly endless cycles of conflict that seem to consume so many in our world. Women are finding new paths to peace and out of the cycles of violence just as they must. Testimonies and actions of women in the toughest situations now expose and challenge the doublespeak and deceit that dwells in plans for peace which ignore victims and survivors of conflicts. Women must not, and often do not, accept that being consumed, commodified, devalued, and destroyed is inevitable. True stories are inspirational. Women and their stories give us, women and men, the courage to move forward for human rights and peace with justice. I'd like to introduce you to 4 women responding to some common challenges and cultures coming away from conflict or in its aftermath. Through the eyes of these women, you'll see the beginnings of them trying to solve the abuse that create a change in thinking that can bring peace, even for children caught in the conflict and its psychological fields left behind. Even women confronting the guns left in a society after a conflict is over. The need for women to stand up for fair elections. The woman you'll see in this film is from Zimbabwe, and if you're following the news, you know what's happened there. She is now in hiding, and a number of people with her in that election commission group at the time have been injured. A woman still trying to move for bringing civil society after succeeding in getting a ceasefire together by bringing men and women, although we talk more about the women in the short film that we have together. So I'd like you to meet these people, and then we'll talk a bit more about what's going on, what other stories we can tell as we have time. So